Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents Probably It's Prophecy by Jacob Peppers. Narrated by Roger Clark. Chapter 1. Dannen collapsed on his back, his body covered in sweat, his chest heaving with great whooping breaths as he stared at the ceiling overhead. A moment later, Clarissa dropped down beside him on the bed, far more gracefully than he had. She smiled mischievously at him as he struggled to get his breath back. He had grown to love that smile over the last week, loved, too, what sometimes followed it. He stared at her, lying naked beside him, her skin seeming to almost glow with a sheen of sweat, a pleasant flush to her cheeks, and thought it unfair that while his own exertions made him look and sound like a labouring cow, they made her look even better than she had, as if she were some princess slumming with a homeless man. Which, considering that he'd left his home behind when Perandius called him, and admittedly had been a bit behind on his taxes already, was likely pretty close to the truth. Good, then, that Clarissa had allowed him to spend this last week at her house, or mansion. Maybe castle would have been more accurate. Better still that he had spent the vast majority of that time in her chambers, her bed in particular. "Staring at my necklace?" she asked, her voice full of amusement. Dannen raised his gaze from her naked chest. "Something like that." "Like what you see, I take it?" He grinned. "Can't complain." "Well, I suppose not," she said, her fingers playing with her necklace. "After all, you're the one that gave it to me." "Give you a lot more than that. You give me a couple of minutes to recover. Anyway, how'd the practice round suit you?" "Oh, it was wonderful," she said, grinning, that grin that told him he was about to feel foolish. "Why, I can only thank the gods themselves for allowing me the opportunity, no, the privilege of bedding repeatedly." She paused, winking. "The world's greatest hero, the bloody butcher himself." Dannen winced at that. "Maybe make it a bit more believable, eh? And please, gods, stow that bloody butcher shit." "Consider it stowed," she laughed. "And if you want more believable, very well, it was short. And sweet." Dannen cleared his throat. "Damn. Words a man rarely wants to hear in bed, no matter their combination." She ran a hand along his chest, along his stomach, which, while not as flat as it once had been, was certainly the closest to it that had been in a long time. It had shrunken in the last months. Fighting for his life was a damned fine diet for a man, assuming, of course, that he survived it. Shrunken enough, in fact, that a glance down showed him not only the very tips of his toes, but some of the tops of his feet as well. Not that it was a particularly welcome sight. He had no idea how he could spend the whole day walking around a mansion and yet still get dirt on them, but he did none the less. Not a kill most folks would wish for, but it was his either way. "Oh, relax, Danny," she said. "Sweet is always good, and as for short, well, considering that I have to go to work, short in this instance is also good. Though I hope you appreciate that I will expect better when I return." "Work?" he asked, knowing he sounded whiny, like one of the women from the stories that pined over the heroes. Another subject upon which the bards took too many liberties as far as he was concerned, but he couldn't help it. The last week had been nice, perhaps the best week of his life. Most of that was Clarissa, though without doubt part of it was that no one had tried to kill him. Except Clarissa herself, of course, who sometimes, during their nightly adventures, seemed intent on doing exactly that. After all, he wasn't as young as he used to be. "Do you really have to go?" "Yes, Danny," she said, smiling. "I really have to go. I've already missed 2 days this week, thanks to you, and I dare not miss a third. People who do not attend their labours often wind up without labours to tend, and as such are inevitably forced into retirement." Dannen grunted. "Retirement? That wouldn't be so bad, would it?" She raised a perfect eyebrow. "We are in the city of assassins, Dannen. Here, retirement is far more final than it might be in other places." "Oh," he said. "Right." She rose then, and while he hated that she was leaving, he had to admit that he enjoyed watching her move completely naked to her wardrobe. "Anyway," she went on, glancing back at him with a smile that said she knew all too well the effect she had on him, "we can't all lead the hero's life, can we? Spend a few days a year risking life and limb, and the rest lying around doing our level best, it seems to me, to avoid using those limbs." He grunted, puffing out his chest. "It's a tiring thing being a hero, but what can I say? Someone has to do it." "Sure," she said with a laugh. "Just as someone has to be the one to accept the grateful king's gold." "It would have been rude not to," he said distractedly, as he watched her bend to pull on one of her stockings. "Anyway," she went on, "some of us actually have to work for a living, and can't rely on earning a king's ransom in gold that will last us for the rest of our lives." "Felt like work at the time," he muttered, wincing as he recalled the events of the battle against a host of undead. Not that it took long, after all. He had plenty of reminders, just about every night when he closed his eyes. "Besides, that king's ransom, as you called it, isn't just mine, but the others too, and if I had a guess, I'd say that knowing Feder, the bastard, has made a pretty good dent in it this last week." "Surely you're joking. That was a lot of coin. It would take some awfully big spending to make a dent in it." "Have you met Feder?" he asked. "There's not a less subtle person in the world. Why, everything about that bastard is big. I don't see why his spending would be any different." She glanced over at him, smiling. "Everything big? Well, maybe I should be inviting him over instead." Dannen grunted. There had no doubt been a time in his life when such a comment would have made him jealous, but he'd nearly had that same life taken away from him too many times. Now he was just thankful for what little good the world decided to throw at him. "You'd probably have to get a bigger bed." She laughed, slipping into her dress, then moving toward a table where she sat to pull on her boots. "Anyway, I'll be back before you can miss me." "I miss you now." "Oh, Dannen Ateran," she said, shaking her head. "You're such a romantic." "Well, I miss parts of you anyway." She scowled at that, and he laughed. "Serves you right for that Feder comment." She finished, pulling on her second boot, then walked to him, bending and kissing him. It was a long, pleasant kiss, one that made some of what he'd went through over the last month worth it. Finally she pulled away. "Relax, Danny. You know you're the only suicidal, scarred hero for me." "But what would you think of a non-suicidal, retired hero? Though the scars'll still be there, can't do much about that." She met his eyes. "You're thinking of quitting?" He shrugged. "We did what Perandius needed doing. Now that's finished, I can think of far better things to do than spend my time fighting trolls and the undead and necromancers with mommy issues." "Speaking as one of those things, I can't help but wonder if you're serious about that." "I've never been more serious," he said, meaning it, at least thinking he did. Later he would come to wonder about that, to wonder about a lot of things, mostly why the world seemed to have it out for everyone, and for him in particular. She sighed, shaking her head. "It's a pleasant fantasy, Dannen, but I fear it is no more than that." "You're wrong." She wasn't. "Oh?" she asked. "Very well. Let me ask you a question, Danny, just a hypothetical. If we were to go on a trip, let's say, and we came upon a camp being attacked by bandits, what would you do?" He frowned. "This trick question?" "No tricks, Danny, just a question. What would you do?" He squirmed, suddenly feeling uncomfortable. "Well, I'd try to help, I guess." She smiled, holding her hands out. "You see?" "Wait a minute," he said. "That's not fair. Anyone would do the same thing." "No, Danny," she said. "No, they wouldn't. Most would run, frightened that the fate befalling the unknown stranger would befall them next, and only a very small fraction of those who ran would try to find guards or someone to tell of what had happened. Likely most would forget about it before they even reached another town." He frowned at that, opening his mouth several times to answer, but finding that the words wouldn't come, mostly because he didn't know what the words were. "I would have studied if I'd known there was going to be a test," he groused. "Oh, Danny," she said, shaking her head. "You've been studying for it all your life." Well, he had no idea of how to respond to that, was still trying to come up with something when she walked to the door and gave him a wink. "I'll see you tonight, assuming you don't go off on some quest or another." "Gods forbid," he muttered, as she closed the door behind her, and unfortunately for him, in this instance, as in so many others, the gods chose not to listen. Chapter 3. As he retrieved his travelling pack from Clarissa's closet and hurriedly began tossing things into it, not quite at random, but nearly so, Dannen told himself he was being ridiculous. True, Clarissa had liked the necklace, but so what? She liked him too, didn't she? Or maybe tolerated. Some days it was hard to tell. Anyway, it was just a rock. A rock found exclusively in the land of the gods, sure, and if what Perandius had told him was true, only found there after great effort, but still, a rock. "Shit," Dannen said, redoubling his efforts, glancing nervously at the door as he did. Maybe he was being ridiculous, and maybe he wasn't. As far as he could tell, there was only one way to know for sure, and that was waiting on Clarissa to return home in several hours after her work was finished. A thought that just then seemed just about as appealing as seeing firsthand what a dragon's insides looked like. He paused, a chill running up his spine. If, that was, she even waited that long, she might well be on her way already. After all, if there was anything capable of making someone change up their routine, surely it was a necklace, and the divining stone adorning it, disappearing off their neck as if by magic. He told himself again he was being silly. Clarissa wouldn't hurt him, probably. The problem, of course, was that while she could be quite pleasant, there was a terribly sharp, terribly deadly side to Clarissa as well. After all, in a city full of assassins and muggers, murderers and thieves, she had risen to the very highest rank. That, Dannen thought, pretty much said all that needed to be said. She was, in short, like the world's sharpest blade, sheathed in a scabbard with bunny rabbits painted on it. Sure, the rabbits might be cute, but then they had a wicked bite if someone pissed them off. And though he couldn't say for certain what a person's mood might be having a beloved necklace disappear off their neck without explanation, he thought it might land them, if not directly on pissed, close enough as to make no difference. And so, in the space of less than 10 minutes, he'd packed his belongings and was hurrying down the stairs from her room, several of Clarissa's servants looking at him oddly, as well they might. After all, though Dannen had spent the last week at Clarissa's home, the better part of it, far better to his mind, had been spent ensconced in her bedroom. Out in the street he felt better, and he thought it probably said a lot of his respect and fear for Clarissa that he would rather brave the streets of the assassin city than to risk her anger. But once he was safely away, he hesitated, realizing he'd given no consideration to where he might find the mage. Likely the god could have told him easily enough, if only he'd thought to ask him. Dannen sighed. Not a great start to a quest, as far as such things went. Normally, if he was ever searching for Feder, he'd do so by the simple expedient of listening for the screams. The problem, of course, was that in Talinseh, a man intent on following the sound of screaming would be wise to pack himself a lunch, as he'd have a full day of it. So it seemed that he had a long search ahead of him. Dannen started down the street, annoyed with himself, with Perandius, with the world itself, and then froze as an idea struck him. He hurried back to one of the guards stationed at the gated entrance to Clarissa's home. "Hey!" The man said nothing, only frowning at him grimly, as if he'd woken up and decided to spend the day practicing his most threatening look. And from what Dannen could tell, the man would be fine taking the rest of the day off. "The man I came here with before. Big man, red hair, likes to shout a lot. Do you know where he went?" "No, sir," the man said, somehow making sir sound like a curse. "I see," Dannen said. Then another thought came to him. "What's the roughest tavern in Talinseh?" The man raised an eyebrow. "Roughest, sir?" "Sure, you know, the most dangerous one. The one no sane man would ever step foot in." "Ah, right, well, that'd be the Angry Bear, sir." The Angry Bear. Well, that sounded about right. Dannen asked the man for directions, listened as he gave them, then nodded. "Thanks." "Anything else, sir?" the guard asked, as if to say there'd best not be. "A coffin, maybe." "Sir?" "Nothing," Dannen said. "Thanks again." And then he was moving. It didn't take as long as it might have to find the Angry Bear. Mostly Dannen just had to walk in the opposite direction of everyone else. Not that most of those were walking, as all those he saw were running like their lives depended on it, which, if the mage was in the vicinity and had been in his cups, they likely did. There was a man sitting beside the door to the tavern, his head hanging down on his chest. He might have been asleep. A bouncer who'd had a long night before and was paying for it today, except the knot on his head, visible even as Dannen passed, and the blood trickling from it. Dannen paused, staring at the unconscious man, gods let him be unconscious, and gave it a good think. It wasn't as if he had to go into the tavern. After all, there were far more pleasant ways to die, he thought, than either at the hands of a pissed-off mage or at the hands of those unfortunate bastards who had managed to find themselves on the opposite end of his wrath. In the end, though, he knew that he was going inside. He may not know what awaited him in the south, but he knew that there was no man in all the world better in a scrap than Feder the Firemaker. Likely it was because of all the practice. No sooner had Dannen eased the door open and stepped inside than someone stumbled into him. He caught the person out of reflex and looked to see that the man had a broken nose, and his eyes were swimming around in their sockets like a drunken fish. "Butcher!" came a roar, and he looked past the shoulder of the man he still held to see Feder, facing off against 5 men, a wide, stupid grin plastered on the mage's face, a mug of ale in one hand, and a man held off the ground by the other. "Just in time," the mage bellowed. "Get that for me, would you?" Dannen frowned, not sure what he meant at first, until the mage nodded his head at the man who had bumped into Dannen. "Get that for me, would you?" As if the man were a trinket he'd dropped that was slightly out of his reach. The man let out a groan in Dannen's arms. "Get you, you bastard," he growled. and Dannen saw his hand going for his belt and the knife sheathed there. Dannen sighed. He hadn't woken up this morning looking for trouble, but as always he was proving to have a knack for finding it. Likely the man was too stunned from the blow he'd taken to make his fingers draw the blade, fingers that were even now fumbling awkwardly at it. But Dannen thought it better not to take any chances. After all, awkwardly stabbed was still stabbed. He sank his fist into the man's stomach and then grabbed him by the back of the jerkin, his other hand catching a fistful of hair lank with sweat, and with a growl and a pivot sent the man careening head-first into the bar, his impact making a dent among the countless others already there before he collapsed on the ground. "Well done, Butcher!" Feder yelled. "What's got you—" "Just a sec," he finished, as one of the 5 men facing him rushed forward. Feder set his ale on the table, then grabbed the man he'd been holding in both hands, swinging him at the one charging him in a blow that sent both makeshift club and clubbed man hurling into a table, knocking it down. The other 3 barreled toward the mage then, and Dannen sighed, walking toward the bar and having a seat. A burly man stood behind the counter, the scars on his arms and his face showing that he'd been in some scraps during his time. But just then the man was staring wide-eyed at the mage and his opponents as they fought, as if he'd just woken to find that he was no longer lying in his bed but in a den of lions, hungry ones. Dannen understood that. A man might think he understood violence, might even think he enjoyed it to some degree. But if violence were a man that might be known, might be understood, then none knew him better than Feder the Firemaker. As the sounds of fighting continued behind him, Dannen had to knock on the counter 3 times until the big man finally turned to him. "An ale, please," Dannen said. "Actually," he sighed, "better make it 2. He was less than halfway done with his drink before he heard a grunt and turned to see Feder sitting down beside him. "Butcher," he said, grinning, "I was wondering if you'd ever rouse yourself out of Claire's bedroom. Had to come up for air, did you?" Talking to him as if he hadn't just fought half the tavern's occupants. "Against my will. Anyway, we've—" "Wait a minute," he said, glancing down at the mage's leg. "Feder, I don't know if you realize this or not, but you've got a knife sticking out of your leg." "What?" Feder asked, then glanced down. He let out an angry growl. "Damn it, I just got these trousers. What is it with criminals these days, Butcher? No one just has a good fight anymore without drawing a damned blade." "Doomed attempts at self-preservation, likely," Dannen said. "Anyway," he went on, turning to glance at the devastation in the tavern's common room, at the men lying unconscious or wishing they were on the floor, looking like broken dolls. "Are they criminals?" Feder shrugged, a look on his face as if to say it made no difference. "Probably. After all, we're in the Assassin City, aren't we?" Dannen grunted. There wasn't really any arguing with that. "Anyway, are you going to do something about that knife?" Feder stared down at it. "Right, you're right," he said, his expression dangerous. "I'll be right back." "No, wait," Dannen said. "That's not what I meant." But it was too late. The mage was already rising, moving toward one of the men who was still conscious, or at least as close to it as any of them were. "Oi!" Feder growled, pulling the man up. "This your knife, lad?" he said. The man said something incoherent, and Dannen sighed, turning back away and motioning back to the barkeep. "Another ale, please." The barkeep stared miserably at the mage's back, then finally heaved a ragged sigh before turning and beginning to pour the ale. It was another few minutes before Feder returned. It was hard to say for sure, what with So much of it there already, but Dannen thought there was a bit more blood staining the man's knuckles than there had been. "You finished?" he asked. "Sorry, Butcher," Feder said, letting out a sigh as he sat. "Just having a bit of fun is all." "I think they'd argue that point with you," Dannen said, glancing back at the men, though, truth be told, none of them looked in particular danger of arguing about anything any time soon. Feder grunted, as if their thoughts on the matter made no difference to him, which, Dannen supposed, they probably didn't. When you were capable of wrestling a troll bare-handed, another man's opinions likely didn't matter quite as much. "So, what's new?" Dannen sighed, telling the man about his meeting with Perandius, about all the god had told him. When he was finished, Feder grunted. "Got to be honest, Butcher, I've never put much stock in prophecies and the like. A man doesn't like his future, he changes it, that's all." "Sure," Dannen said, "or beats it into submission." The mage grinned, running a hand through his long, unkempt red beard. "Exactly." "So, does that mean you're not coming?" Feder grunted. "Of course I'm coming, don't be daft. When are we leaving?" And that was it. Just like that, the man was coming. Feder the Firemaker was many things, but complicated was not one of them. And despite the many problems the man inevitably caused, Dannen felt a heady relief to know he would be by his side. "How does now sound to you?" Feder glanced around the common room, as if looking to see if anyone else wanted to give him a go. Unsurprisingly, no one did, and he gave a nod. "Sounds good. I'd say I'm just about done here. What about the lad and Mariana?" "Haven't spoken to them yet," Dannen said. "Figured I'd get you first. Give Talinseh's fighting men a chance to rest and recover." Feder snorted. "Whereabouts do you suppose we'll find them?" Dannen sighed. "Where's the nearest bed?" Chapter 4. In the end, it was not much more difficult than that. Dannen and Feder travelled to the edge of the city, near the gate they had arrived at over a week ago, when he'd meant to save Clarissa from the Tribune, only to discover that he would be saving her from herself. They weren't at the first inn they checked, but the barkeep at the second claimed to have 2 people matching their description renting a room. "Don't want no trouble, though," the man said. "Not at my inn. You got business with those 2, you make sure you address it outside my walls, understand?" All of this while watching Feder carefully. "We aren't looking for any trouble," Dannen said. "They're friends of ours, that's all." The man grunted, as if he'd heard as much before. "Anything gets broken, you'll be paying for it." "I understand," Dannen said. The man looked at them for another second, his gaze travelling between the 2 of them, then made a sour face, giving his shoulders a small shrug. "Third door on the left up the stairs." And with that he turned and walked down the bar, busying himself wiping the counter. "Can't say as I much care for being treated that way, Butcher," Feder said, with a frown. "Like we come looking for trouble." "Yeah," Dannen said. "The nerve. Anyway," he went on, thinking that Feder not looking for trouble was about like a drunk not drinking, "let's go find the others." They walked up the stairs to the door the barkeep had told them and saw the squirrel normally perched on Tesla's shoulder, crouched outside, its little squirrel arms crossed angrily across its squirrel chest. "Hi, Mele," he said. Unsurprisingly, the squirrel goddess didn't respond, at least with words, though judging by the angry chittering she'd let loose, Dannen thought it probably best he wasn't able to understand creatures the way Tesla could. Muffled sounds were coming from inside the room, bangs and scrapes and thumps. "Ah, to be young again, eh, Butcher?" Feder said, grinning. They've been in this room for like a week, Dannen said. I don't know if I was ever that young. Feder snorted. That's so! And what of you and Claire? The two of you just...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?